Hello and welcome to Drop the Mic Podcast, where we discuss technology, theology, and all things in between. I want to personally thank you for joining us today. Now sit back, relax, share this, engage with the podcast that's already in progress. God bless you. Oftentimes, God sends us on a hiatus, a break from podcasting to refresh your battery. I took that from God, and I am back, large and in charge. I am your host, DK Hammonds, one of the hosts. Missing is Niels. As you can see, he and I both have the same haircut, a little bald on top, still even on the sides. And today, I have none other than what I would consider one of the leading voices in the AI conversation, as well as churches, is my brother, Todd. Todd, brother, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, DK. How you doing? Glad
One day at a time, bro.
Yeah.
It is what? Cloudy in Dallas. It's not hot in Dallas. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Take it.
I'm in the west suburbs of Chicago, and we're in that season where the weather likes to give us like a sunny day and then just take it away. And today's one of the cloudy and mildly too cold for my liking, but
No doubt.
Yeah.
So, man, having one of these conversations around AI, I felt like you were one of those leading voices who could kind of position us into having a deeper conversation around it. So our audience may not be as familiar with you about it. So share with our audience who you are, what you've done in this space.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm actually by vocation originally a pastor. My wife and I have pastored and planted churches all across the states. Planted a church in Flint, Michigan, which is where I grew up during the Flint water crisis, and kind of just came about during that time of leading a church in the midst of some, a serious injustice, a serious ministry crisis, of really asking some deep questions about how the church can effectively minister in the culture that God places it in. That led me to continue on in my education, my master's, and eventually my doctorate in a field called missiology, which is really the study of how the church can effectively communicate the gospel and minister to the cultures in which it lives. And so now, fast forward years later, I am the missiologist in residence at an organization called OneHope, which specializes in scripture engagement for children and youth around the world. But part of that is actually leading a consortia, so like a collection of ministries that have partnered together to explore the landscape of digital ministry, how the church can effectively minister in those spaces, what are some best practices. Because even though the internet's it's not new by any means now, digital ministry is still very much kind of the Wild West. And especially at the local church level, a lot of pastors are like, this sounds great, but I don't know where to begin, or this is great if you're a church of 10,000 and have 100 people on your staff, but that's actually not the case. And so part of what I'm currently doing is this September 30th, I'm releasing a book called AI Goes to Church. And that is really aimed to be kind of a pastoral theology, a practical theology of this conversation, which is dominating, the headlines dominating our conversation. And again, a lot of churches are asking the question of, how do I do this? How do I do it faithfully, ethically? How do I do it, so the robots don't come and take us away and replace this kind of thing? Or just simply, how can I leverage this to maximize my effectiveness as a pastor, as a church, et cetera. So that's really what led me to write the book. It is not, I will say this as a kind of a disclaimer, it is not, 31 ways to maximize your use of GPT. It's not that. Primarily because if I wrote that, it would be obsolete by the time it was actually published. So
Absolutely.
I wanted this to be really kind of an evergreen thing where we think theologically. We actually kind of pause and think about what are the ramifications of this new technology? What does it mean to be human in the age of AI? What does it mean to, fight for social justice, to participate in God's reconciliatory work in the world in the age of AI, and to anticipate potentially some of the questions even that we might be approaching ministry wise within the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. That's rich, bro. I think there are pastors that are still yet skeptical because they don't know if AI is ethical. Now, because you're the leading voice here, I will ask you, because I know AI, I know the answer to it. My audience may not know the answer to it. Explain to us the ethical part of AI and how it should be used.
Yeah. So I think in that regard, it's good to ask. It's similar to asking, is the internet ethical? And the
Sure.
answer to that question can be yes. It can also be no.
Mhm.
And it can be yes and no in ways that we're consciously aware of, and sometimes ways that we're not consciously aware of. I'll give you an example. So I can use, Chat GPT in such a way that helps to kind of automate some of the administrative, non-people facing tasks in my church.
Mhm.
And I would say that's an ethical use of AI,
Yes.
automating workflows. So that way you can actually be free to spend more time face to face with people. But there are also considerations, for example, the environment. AI requires massive amounts of energy
Mhm.
in the server banks that it runs off of.
Mhm.
And so it actually can contribute to some of the environmental issues and concerns that we've talked about over the last several decades. And so there are, sometimes unintended consequences that we need to be aware of too, because there's a whole green AI movement. How do we run servers off of solar power and wind power and stuff like that in order to do kind of the least amount of unintended harm?
That's good. Most people don't consider the conversation around ethics and environment at all. It's usually the conversation to sit around, can I use it and what's the use cases? And give me one of those 31 ways that you've used it so I can use it as well. Which brings me to like a lighthearted question. And that is, you mentioned 31 ways. There's all types of material out here about AI. And I've read a lot of it, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, I could have drunk a V8, just personally. Not you. Said there's nothing to do with Todd, everything to do with me. I could have drunk a V8. So with information as you mentioned, because you said it very eloquently, when you said, hey, this stuff is going to change tomorrow. And applying something that is like this, that's static, is going to impact how you use it on the day to day. So, brother, help us understand how we can disseminate through some of this AI stuff that we see so that we can have better use of AI in terms of what we read and material we consume.
Yeah, I think one of the first things to do is something that we really didn't do in the last kind of big internet revolution, which was the emergence of the smartphone and social
Mhm.
media era.
Mhm.
So we're talking, mid to late 2000s. I think it was 2007, the original iPhone came out. We kind of just rushed into, man, this is awesome. I can look at all the stuff I can do. The touchscreen is so nice, yada, yada, yada. I can keep in touch with my friends from high school, whether or not I want to, but like that, we didn't really stop to think about what does it do to our common humanity to have all the world's knowledge at our fingertips at an instant, to not have to kind of stretch those memory muscles to remember things because you have a digital assistant to remind you all the time. What does it do to things like our understanding of community and even friendship when friend is now reduced to something just as a connection on Facebook? Now, we're kind of playing catch up and trying to understand how do we mitigate some of the negative effects of social media on our youth, on ourselves, et cetera. So I think a first step when we talk about AI, our first step is to pause and to think, to examine before I integrate this into my life, what am I losing? A great
Mm.
example that I actually use in the book is from a Christian ethicist named Wendell Berry and poet. Wendell Berry lives in Kentucky and is this dude like as he's just like he still operates most of his farm by horse and plow. Like, I mean, he's a fascinating human being and just chock full of so much wisdom. In 1987, he wrote an essay called Why I Won't Buy a Computer. And in the essay, he talks about how, he had been writing for years at this point, and part of his writing process was he would type something out on this old typewriter from the 50s. He would type it out, and then he and his wife would sit down. He would read it to her, and then they would dialogue about it. She would kind of be his first reader, his critic, and mull over it. Basically, long story short, his conclusion was, I don't want to buy a computer because I don't want to give up this intimacy that my wife and I share in this process that we have. And I use the example of my wife and I, who often co-preach together. Like, I can leverage Chat GPT and stuff to more efficiently create sermons, but we have built something beautiful in our capacity to kind of, even when we're not preaching together, to run that by one another and all that kind of stuff. That I don't know if that's something I'm prepared to give up. So I think asking, what do I stand to give up by losing or by integrating this into my life? Another question that I think is essential to ask, because AI promises to make our lives more efficient, to give us back time and all of that kind of stuff. But every new technology promises us the gift of time. If you take this on, you will have more time to write poetry and, drink sun tea on the porch and like all that kind of stuff. But what has happened with every new technology, our lives just get faster. So, and so we have to think about, if I'm going to integrate this into my life, and if it genuinely does give me back some time, how can I steward that? Not to just return to toil, but instead to create space in my life for meaning, for friendships, or community, to actually sit down and maybe write some poetry or something like that, to do the things in life that matter rather than just tagging on more work, doing more in the same 40 hours than you normally would. What if we actually, especially as the people of God, what if we rethought even our understanding and relationship to work, to do the same amount in less time so that we have more time to impact and to nurture community and relationship in the world around us?
That's beautifully put in terms of how you view stewarding relationship and how AI can take away some of those nuanced points in stewarding of relationship and stewarding of time. As a person that's a technologist, been in technology for the last 20 years, been preaching for that long, one thing I know about tech is it can only make your life easier up to your level of understanding. If you don't have a high output of understanding or a high seek of knowledge, there's always going to be this tension between you and where you're trying to go. And what I've learned is, like, in the AI space, is as much as we want to make things easier, the inundation of more apps make things harder because you don't know which one actually does what. And so now we're getting into the conversation where, okay, we've gotten past the creating the queries, and we've gotten past the creating the custom GPTs, and we've gotten past, now we can create websites. We don't want to do that. Now we want to create small digital minions to do small minimal tasks for us. And here's where, as an, again, technologist, I pause and I say, you guys, you do know that eventually, not that it's going to take a job or anything like that, it's going to take away, to your writer's point, the human experience. And just like I deal with church people, I tell them all the time, I create digital up to the point that the human experience cannot reach. There still has to be a place where the human experience can be thought through, touched. For instance, if you have an assimilation process at a church, 50%, 60, 70% could probably be digital. But that 30% is as critical as the 60. That phone call, that additional email that says your name and a thought that they thought of you when they saw you. Those things matter way more than just the assimilation process in which we've created. And so I love that you said that. I think that's important, that we don't miss the value of the human experience. It is so critical. And if we put an AI everywhere, we'll never see the true beauty of what it is to be a part of God's humanity. And so I wanted to kind of lift that up as we were talking. So let's think through, for those of y'all who are watching, I'm DK Hammonds. I'm here with my good brother Todd, and we're wrestling, or a seminary professor would call it. We're doing the delicate dance with this conversation of AI. And such a riveting conversation I think a lot of people will want to have. And again, I love the fact that you said, hey, I could create a chat GPT that could be way more streamlined, but it can't replace my wife. It can't replace that relationship. So in your experience, in your world, what tools have you seen work well and doesn't compromise the human experience in your world?
So the funny thing about artificial intelligence and the way that we talk about it now is really as a result of OpenAI releasing ChatGPT, kind of propelled AI into the forefront of our minds. And now everything, you scroll your Instagram or whatever, and there's ads for AI this, AI that. Sometimes it's actually just a marketing gimmick that, app has used artificial intelligence for years. Nothing's new, but now it's AI powered,
Yeah, bro.
So it's to go back to the question of, how do I discern whether or not to integrate it,
That's a good one.
The fact is that we've had AI a part of our lives for years.
Yeah,
The actual
absolutely.
term artificial intelligence dates back to the 1950s.
Yes.
And it's definitely emerged and evolved over the course of time. But Google, has been around forever and has used a version of artificial intelligence since the beginning. What you're recommended when you turn on Netflix or Hulu or whatever is in part an AI-driven algorithm. Same thing with what you see in your social media. So I think it's important to recognize, to some extent, it's been around for a while, and the awareness of that can help us understand there are aspects of back-end artificial intelligence that are super helpful. So like, for example, there's an organization that I work with called Jesus.net, and they're a scripture engagement kind of discipleship platform all online based out of the Netherlands. And on their back end, they have integrated a Salesforce, their AI powered algorithm, and have created essentially a series of discipleship key performance indicators, key KPIs, that as users interact with their content, their kind of benchmark survey data and stuff that they collect is measured against those KPIs to generate recommendations based on kind of essentially the growth areas in that person's spiritual development. A brilliant way to leverage artificial intelligence, not only to not circumvent the human process, but to also actually enhance someone's learning journey for the sake of their growth in Christ. I think other great examples, like I had mentioned at the top of our conversation, is automation and automating those bits that would actually take us away from people. So generating emails and, standard operating procedures and policy books and stuff like that. A lot of those things where we're pouring over a word processor or an email inbox can be enhanced or streamlined so that we are free to have more meaningful conversation. I want to say also, when it pertains to churches integrating that kind of stuff, I would encourage church leaders to think about ways that they can integrate artificial intelligence at some of the back end so that they can do standout human to human type things on the front end. So like in a world where everything is, anytime you click on a company's website now, a chatbot pops up and you're chatting with an artificial life form, how much more meaningful it is when you connect to a human individual. So when it comes to follow-ups from visitors and things of that sort, how much more meaningful that's going to be as AI continues to be used widespread for pastors to actually call visitors or to send a personal handwritten card. Those kind of OG, just old-fashioned kind of ways of church ministry are going to increasingly stand out in a world that is increasingly artificial. So I think to your point about like the human piece standing out, that's not just so, we can kind of take hold of a bygone era, but it actually will enhance the hospitality and experience of your church ministry by putting front and center and prioritizing those human components. I will say, I use in my own life, in my own ministry, I use several different AI tools. One is project management software called Motion, which helps kind of I lack the ability to prioritize and kind of map out the details. And so it does it for me. And I have found it to be enormously beneficial, both to my own efficiency and productivity, but also for me to be able to kind of create space in my life so that I'm not, again, not just doing more in less time. I use a lot of Chat GPT, and another large language model similar to Chat is called Claude,
Mhm.
which is fantastic. Probably for kind of my fellow nerds out there, whether you're in a local church or in academia or whatever, or just like to do research. There's another program called SciSpace. Sci is in science, SCI space, that allows you to research based on prompts that you give it, tons of articles, dissertations, papers, and stuff like that within a matter of seconds. So something that would take an academic like months to do can be done in a matter of like an hour or two now. So those are just some examples of things that can kind of, again, streamline for the sake of making space in your life.
That's good, man. As you were wrapping that up and mentioning just some applications, instantly my mind went to, I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. Not necessarily a lot of mega churches for the most part. Most of them are rural, under 1,000, if you will. But at some point in that growth, pastors got assistants, and not necessarily executive assistants, but preaching assistants to help them think through, process, synthesize messages and sermons so that when they got to Sunday, they could be prayed up, prepped, and then able to preach. To that same end, how do you feel? Because the tools that you mentioned does all of what I just said. How do you feel about pastors then having certain assistants preaching wise to help them synthesize and do the work of preaching, the hard lifting of preaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've actually been in that space before, where
Okay.
I assisted other pastors in like background research and stuff like that. What I have found, and some pastors did just, hey, this is what I'm preaching about. Give me some exegetical content, some suggestions for illustrations, etc. And that was that. I think the richest experience that I had, though, was when pastors also recognized I had a preaching gift, and didn't mean that they need to
Mm,
bring me out to preach, but recognized there's a conversational opportunity when two preachers kind of talk through a sermon together. So I had one who's now a friend in Lexington. We would essentially kind of preach through them, kind of talk through it together. I grew up Pentecostal, so you kind of get
oh,
fired up
man,
even in that
for
conversation.
sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So like, we would kind of revy it out, and kind of talk about like, this is how I would do this. And, this is how I would land this point and stuff like that. And so it transcended simply just an employee, employer, or contracted employee kind of thing, and instead became something that was more a side by side kind of conversation, which ironically is more similar to how the first Christians would have prepared sermons, even how Paul would have written his letters. What we have is the New Testament, even
Mhm.
assigned to a single author, were written in a collectivist culture, which would have been written in groups. So I think
Yes.
when it comes to things like that, or another good example is with churches that have a design team. There's a lot that image generation, things like Midjourney
Mhm.
or ChatGPT as a video rendering component
Mhm.
now can save a tremendous amount of time. So from a purely HR perspective, it's like, well, we don't need as much staff. I would push back on that. I talk about this in the book of reimagine what that relationship looks like. Can your design team actually kind of, instead of just being kind of an output of, content, a video or whatever, the latest trailer video or whatever for a sermon, what if you really tapped into what those people actually are, which are the artists of your church, and allowed them
Mm,
to dream, to expand the horizons, to kind of
yes.
empower them and release them in a way that the church really hasn't done super well over the last several centuries, but did very well centuries ago. The reason we have the Sistine Chapel and the Statue of David and the Mona Lisa is because we released gifted artists to be able to do what the Holy Spirit was leading them to do. When it comes to that assistant, if that person has a gift that warrants them actually being hired to help in that sermon prep, I think bringing them alongside and pouring into them, mentoring them, you probably have something of a Padawan, to use a Star Wars reference, like raise them up to be Jedi, like raise them up, kind of take on that rabbinic quality of pouring into them and help draw out the unique gift that God has placed in them, while also imparting some of what God has placed in you to be able to let your legacy transcend just simply the sermons that you preach. Because the legacy that you have as a preacher, as a pastor, is going to be in the people, not just in the content.
Riveting. You mentioned, in a roundabout way, I would summarize it, about how AI can allow us to reimagine how we pour into others. I think I have not heard one person in the AI space outside of myself, because I'm always big on the human experience, even remotely lean into that. Most of the conversations, if I'm being honest, are situating themselves around how we can help you use it and what masterclass can we have you be a part of, which goes against the pouring into the individual. So I love that you mentioned that, that AI allows for us to reimagine and reclaim the time that we once lost in busyness, that we should be replacing and pouring into other people. That is a powerful thought that I think we're missing. Again, I talk about it a lot of the time, because that's I build from that perspective. As a technologist, I am building from, this cannot replace a human. This can make it more efficient. This can streamline it. But in terms of the replacement, there's nothing that can replace that spontaneity or that spirit in which exists. So me and a pastor was talking earlier today, and he's using AI, so I'm kind of coaching him through that. And so he and I were talking about this app called Pinecone and how it's used as this knowledge-based aspect to take chunks of data and break those chunks of data down so that you can repurpose them, reproduce them, or whatever. And so I said, you know what, man, we could do all of this for preaching, but let me tell you something. If you ain't got no spirit, this will not help you. AI needs the spirit. And so I say all of that because I think that's super important. I think also what's important is, how AI can transform how we view hospitality. Like, I didn't miss that. I caught that. I was like, oh, that's a powerful thought process. Again, rooted in the human experience. How can we upgrade the common touch? There's a poem that we recite here about how we can walk with kings and not lose our virtue, and walk with people and not lose the common touch. And so that thought process always kind of stands out as it relates to it. Automation and then learned behaviors are things that we see. So let's be futurist for a second. Future speaking, what do you see coming down the pipe?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in the very, very short term, like I'm wondering literally by Christmas, like how often we're going to begin to see these conversations, because since I started writing the book, I've begun to see traces of different articles and stuff lending toward this. But we're going to begin to see, I'm convinced, coming to a youth group near you are going to be questions about, can my AI chatbot get saved? Can my, I'm in love with, the AI that I've created on Replica, or, and this kind of stuff, which sounds silly. It sounds crazy, except for the fact that there's a lot of data that's showing that those who are engaging in what I call anthropomorphic forms of AI, so AI that is intended to mimic the human interaction. It's intended to demonstrate empathy, to show emotion. It's a mirror. It's mimicking, like a parrot, that emotion, but it's extremely effective at it, and it's showing that people with chatbots like Replica that are kind of relationally oriented. There's a host of them out now that you can use. that people find deep connection and form deep connection, even knowing that it's an artificial life form that they're talking to, not life form, but an artificial set of algorithms. But to the extent that there was just an article that was put out not long ago where a young man actually took his own life because his mental health had degraded to such an extent because of his obsession with his relationship with a chatbot. And so we're crazy if we don't think that that is going to be on the forefront of a lot of conversations, specifically with young people, but not exclusive to young people. And we have to do more than simply give them a proof text that we find out of scripture we somehow justify being related and then hope the conversation goes away. We need to think deeply about what it means to be human, what it means to bear the image of God, what it means to live in a world where increasingly that kind of anthropomorphic AI is not going to be simply on my smartphone screen, but will be in embodied forms. Like there's a whole bunch of companies now, Tesla being one of them, that's working on kind of servant bots that can do your laundry and stuff, which I'm all for a robot doing my laundry. However, there will, as those become increasingly sophisticated to mimic the human experience, there's going to become a connection that is significant. We're going to have to understand as church leaders how to navigate those questions in a theologically robust way. The other thing that I see kind of on a more ongoing basis is in relation to the function of the pastorate and also the function of Christian educators, moving away from what it has been for centuries back to some ancient roots. And because for centuries, if in any given village or town in anywhere in the world where there was a general or a Christian populace, the clergy was they were the ones that had the library. They were probably one of the most educated, more in many parts of the world, even more educated than physicians. And so they were the dispensers of religious knowledge in particular, but kind of knowledge in general. They were the elders at the city gates, as it were. And so we kind of still view the pastor as, well, my function is primarily in the pulpit, especially among kind of our evangelical, Pentecostal, charismatic spaces. It is to exhort and to teach. But we're increasingly finding ourselves in a space where I can be teaching and a young person can be fact checking my sermon in real time, or engaging in a host of, quoting me and putting me on the internet, like all that kind of stuff, like showing or looking up alternative viewpoints. And that's not a bad thing, but it calls into question if my smartphone and specifically something like ChatGPT is going to be able to source knowledge at a faster pace than I ever will be able to as a pastor. Then what is the function of the pastor? And I believe it requires us returning back to the very rabbinic kind of New Testament shape of being guides on the side, of instilling wisdom. Wisdom is the application of knowledge. It's knowing how to discern and to apply knowledge. And we are a culture that is just inundated with knowledge and completely bankrupt of wisdom. We need pastors, we need church leaders to recover what it means to instill wisdom in others, which means walking side by side with them, which means I'm a firm believer that the role of the sermon on Sunday is a time honored and tested thing that will never fully go away. But I believe it's going to take more of an exhorting. It's necessarily going to take more of an exhorting kind of shape of casting vision, of calling God's people back to fidelity and faithfulness to Jesus, less than let me tell you all the Greek words for love. And so I say all of that to say, I think that role of recapturing wisdom, which, by the way, for those of us in church ministry, for those of us who walk in leadership and are entrusted with the lives and the souls of others, it's crucial that we understand that wisdom is something that God gives freely to those who ask. The Bible talks about it, but we have to pursue it. Large portions of Proverbs are all about pursuing wisdom, which means it doesn't come as naturally as we want. I can be an old fool by just, hoping that I kind of get wisdom by osmosis, or I can intentionally pursue it. And I think as we do that in an age where knowledge is easy to come by, wisdom will be a valuable resource that pastors can provide.
And one thing, as much as I love technology as well as AI, it always has a void as it relates to wisdom. And wisdom is that lived experience that a computer could not teach you. And this is not a fight against computers. I love computers. I work with computers all day. Not a fight against that. But it is, to your point, the place that we need to reimagine is how we disseminate wisdom and how we give it out, provide it to our young people, to our older people, to set them up for success. And we can build all the technology we want to, but if that human experience is not pouring, what you're going to see is stony ground, and you're going to see thistles and everything else because the soil was not ready for the water to be poured out. Yeah. Todd, brother, I appreciate your time today. Me and you probably could talk about this for hours.
I think so.
Where could our followers find you and support you at? Please share that information, brother.
Yeah, so you can find me at my website, toddkorpi.com. It has kind of the links to where I'm doing what. You can follow me on Substack, and then you can check out and even pre-order my book, AI Goes to Church, on Amazon.
Perfect. Please, followers of the like, follow this brother. Great insight, great information. He is a prophet to the nation and the streets, and I appreciate his ministry walk and journey. So, Social Media Church, thank you guys for listening. Please don't forget to support us. Follow us on YouTube. And if you heard something that pricked your heart, make sure you put it in the chat below. We're watching it, we're responding, and we're ready to engage with you. And most of the time, it won't be an AI bot. It'll probably be one of us having a conversation with you. Peace and love. We love y'all. Thank y'all. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. My hope is that the podcast added value to your life. Please, please, please subscribe from your favorite application, leave us a review, and even follow us on YouTube for your up-to-date information. Thank you. Peace.